I'm honored this morning to introduce our baccalaureate speaker and to welcome back to campus Reverend Jessica Henks. She's a 2005 graduate of Jewell with Bachelor of Arts degrees in both religion and history. She graduated with honors in religion and earned certificates in leadership and Christian-related vocation. In her time at Jewell, she studied for a year at Oxford University's Keble College and was active in several campus organizations, including the Prior Leadership Program and Christian Student Ministries. Reverend Henks was a Kern Scholar at Northern Baptist Theological Seminary in Chicago, where she graduated with a Master of Divinity degree. For 8 years, Jessica was pastor at First Baptist Church of Kankakee, Illinois. She currently lives in Leawood, Kansas with her husband, Brian, also a Jewell grad, and their 2 sons. Jessica is the interim pastor at the First Baptist Church of Garnett, Kansas. In presenting an introduction, I always think about what can I say that creates a connection with you to Jessica. Students may sense a connection when you know that Jessica described her high school self as an over-functioning perfectionist whose greatest joy in life was overachieving. You may feel a connection with that, Jewell grads. Others of us may feel a connection when you know that people who know Jessica well say that she's a mystic in her spirituality. Jessica agrees. She writes, "While I don't live up to Antony or Catherine of Siena or Francis of Assisi, I understand them. I identify with them." When I knew her as a Jewell student, I sensed Jessica was an old soul. Now, you may not be familiar with that term. An old soul is a person who's thoughtful, possesses wisdom and maturity beyond their chronological age. A person who's an old soul has the tendency to think a lot about everything. An old soul practices reflection that in turn produces deep insights. An old soul sees the power and knowledge and the happiness that comes from wisdom. After the anthem by the William Jewell Concert Choir, we welcome Reverend Jessica Henks for our baccalaureate message that she entitled, "The Race Marked Out."
Good morning. It is my deep honor to be with you this morning and to share these words of reflection as you prepare to graduate today. It was nearly 15 years ago, on New Year's Eve, that I boarded a plane for the Florida Everglades on my outward bound experience as a prior leadership fellow. There would be a great many trials over those next 10 days that would test my courage, my strength, and my faith. One of those challenges which continues to influence my life and ministry happened on day 5, a seemingly endless day of persevering the course. After 4 days of literally cutting our way through a series of mangrove tree channels and slogging our way through knee-deep mud in our canoes, we found our way to the Gulf of Mexico. Day 5 was our first day on the Gulf. Open water, waves, fresh air, and most importantly, no more mosquitoes. Due to the complexity of inland navigation, we were a day behind and needed to make it to Highland Beach by the next morning in order to rendezvous with resupply and begin our solo time. We had a lot of ground to cover and new challenges to conquer as we set out on now tidal coastal waters. Day 5 was my day to be the logistics coordinator, responsible for making decisions and organizing the rest of the crew. I was the leader of the prior leaders that day. As we started, the waters were clear, the sun shining, and we were making excellent time. We would face strong winds and high waves as the afternoon wore on. We would have a canoe capsize in Shark River, sending gear and crewmates drifting downriver in frigid waters. We would witness dolphins in the wild and phosphorescence glowing in the beauty of nightfall. Overall, it was a pretty good day, and we were doing well. But as the light of day began to fade and night began to fall over the waters, this girl from Kansas began to lose her bearings. You see, if you're familiar with being on the open ocean at night, there is a phenomenon that occurs as the sun sets. You see, the horizon line disappears into a haze as the water and the sky blend together in what appears to be a fog rolling in to consume you. At least, that is what it looked like to me. And as the night wore on, the leader of the crew, I began to get nervous. It was harder and harder to read the shoreline. Unlike during the day when you could navigate by lining up inlets and rivers and other land features as they met the Gulf in order to find your place on the map, in the darkness, the shoreline just looked like one dark outline of trees without unique markings. Our headlamps offered little relief. We were doing the best that we could to navigate and to make our way. I was trying to read the map and the land, and I thought I knew where we were. There was a large bay of water in front of us, and we needed to cross it. We were debating the pros and cons of following the shoreline or just making a beeline across the top of the bay. But I feared that if the fog, which I still believed was rolling in, overtook us, we would find ourselves lost without a shoreline to follow. According to my calculations, this was our last obstacle before we landed safely for the night. As we debated and my colleagues were leaning toward the straight path, I grew more nervous. Suddenly our guides paddled up next to me. They had been keeping their distance, allowing us to make our own way. I had handled the trials of the day well, but now they seemed concerned. Where do you think we are, Jessica? Here. Jessica, look around. Where are we? My optimism and my courage gave way. Reality set in. I wasn't sure. I was exhausted. We'd been paddling for 15 hours and already, many of them in the dark. I was cold and I was scared. I don't know, I said, throwing my hands up in the air. I don't know how to find my way. I can't read the shoreline. I don't know how to navigate these waters. And there is fog overtaking us. Jessica, look out there into the Gulf. What do you see? Fog! No, there is no fog. Focus. What do you see? Towers. Towers with red blinking lights. Now, in my Midwestern mind, cell phone towers, television towers. In the Midwest at night, if there's a blinking light on the horizon, it's a TV tower or a cell phone tower. And that is what my experience told me. No, look at your map. What do you see? And there, far out from the shore in my map, I saw these dots labeled navigation points. Suddenly I realized these dots were in the same place as those blinking lights on the horizon. Navigation points. I could take compass readings and pinpoint my location. And so I began the math. And soon, reality dawned on me. We were nowhere close to Highland Beach. We had several hours of canoeing left, several miles left to cover. We rallied, we took stock of the situation, we pushed ahead. Around 4 a.m., we finally approached that final bay, and we paddled across to Highland Beach. That night, in the darkness and unfamiliar territory, faced with the weight of leading my peers and keeping them safe, I couldn't figure out how to navigate the course laid out for me. I didn't know what to do. I felt lost and alone. In the first century, the early generations of the church struggled to navigate the course Christ had laid out for them. In Hebrews chapter 10, we learn that they faced strong persecution for their faith, enduring public ridicule, imprisonment, confiscation of property, and physical suffering. Some were despairing of their faith and giving up meeting together. Their Jewish brothers, who had not believed that Jesus was the Messiah, pressured believers to return to the old covenant, to the law, the temple, the sacrificial system. The early church struggled. They struggled with their own questions. Why? Why would God continue to allow evil and suffering in the Messiah's kingdom? How was this the fulfillment of generations of expectations? The author of Hebrews responds with an allusion to Habakkuk chapter 2. Habakkuk gives voice to the fears and doubts of his generation. Indeed, perhaps the fears and doubts of every generation. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted. With incredible audacity, Habakkuk speaks words that often we are too afraid to utter to God. Why? Why injustice? Why evil? Why suffering? And the Lord answers Habakkuk's request. The author of Hebrews recognizes the wisdom of that response and brings it to the ears of his own generation. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and not delay. The men and women of faith listed in Hebrews chapter 11 faced great challenge, even suffering and death, to ensure that God's salvation plan would move forward toward its fulfillment. In obedience, they lived their lives. In faithfulness, they believed God would intervene when the time was right. These were all commended for their faith. The author of Hebrews writes, "Yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect." He understands that God's timing is inscrutable, sometimes frustratingly slow. And yet, the early church, like those of great faith who had brought the covenant of God to the next generation, that of the author of Hebrews, they had seen the climax of that salvation plan, the outworking of its fullness. Jesus Christ, crucified and resurrected, ascended and on his heavenly throne. The perfect sacrifice, our great high priest and eternal king, Lord of all things in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, for all time. And yet, that kingdom still awaits its final culmination. Though the victory won, the body of Christ still struggles and suffers and sacrifices to bear out its witness in the world. In John 14, Jesus was speaking to his disciples, explaining that he was getting ready to leave them and that they could not go with him now. However, they would follow later. He promised them that he would prepare the way for them and that they could follow. They already knew the way, he told them. And into that promise, Thomas spoke incredible, honest truth. "Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way?" "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Jesus would go on and speak of revelation and the gift of the Holy Spirit, but the disciples would still not understand the course Jesus was laying out for them. They did not yet understand that the appointed time Habakkuk had ached for, the promise that Abraham and Moses and David and the prophets had longed to see, was standing in front of them. Habakkuk, Thomas, those early Christians were searching for the path of faithfulness, what it meant to be part of God's salvation story. The author of Hebrews tells us faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. A great many men and women have walked that journey. And therefore, in great consequence, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. That image of the cloud takes us back again into God's story and speaks to the beacons that God has used to light the course. It takes us back to the first covenant with God's people atop Mount Sinai, the cloud of God's glory that settled over the mountain, out of which Moses brought the law. The cloud that settled upon the tent of meeting and the tabernacle. The cloud that led the people by day through the wilderness and into the promised land. The cloud that settled in the Holy of Holies of the temple. The cloud that departed in Ezekiel's vision. The cloud that settled upon Jesus and his disciples atop the mountain of transfiguration. The glory of God among God's people. Now, those of faith, who believed what they did not see, who lived in obedience to a promise they would not fully grasp. They are a cloud of witnesses, a cloud of God's glory descended upon the world throughout history. Surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, witnesses of faithfulness and love, run the race marked out for us. You are preparing to depart today on a new journey, a new chapter in your life. For some of you, that journey will take you on to further education and specialization. For some of you, that journey will take you straight into your career field. For some of you, you are still waiting for that call with a job offer. Some of you may still be unsure of what that next chapter looks like, unable to discern the path ahead. The world is a place still plagued with injustice, with suffering, even evil. Yet, it is also filled with possibility, with opportunity, with those seeking to do good and to make the world a better place, with those faithfully persevering, bearing witness to God's salvation in the world, the cloud of God's glory. This is a world where sometimes it is hard to discern truth. It is easy to take advantage of others. It can be hard to know what is most loving. It can be difficult to discern the best course of action. We can find ourselves tempted to take an easier path, a more lucrative path, a path of least resistance, but one that ultimately would leave us lost, confused, and alone. One that would take us on a course that would not tell the story that we want to tell. How do we discern the race marked out for us, our careers, our families, the difference that we can make in the world? How do we find our way in a world that can feel very dark? How do we find our way when we can't read the shoreline, when we can't find our bearings, when we feel as if we are being overtaken by the fog of life's uncertainty? In a world where we can still cry out with Habakkuk, God, where are you? Where is justice and goodness and love in this broken world? With Thomas, God, where are you going? We aren't sure of the way. With me, in my boat, I don't know the way. I can't see. I don't know how to lead. The author of Hebrews tells us there is a blinking navigation point on the horizon. A point from which we can take a reading, find our place in the world, Jesus. Let us fix our eyes on him. He is the author, that is the Word who was there at the beginning with God, who is God, the creative Word that began our journey of faith, and he is the perfecter, that is the completer, the one who brings our faith to its fullness in his sacrifice and resurrection. It is in Jesus and the indwelling of the Spirit of God that we find our compass and our guide. But what does it really mean to follow Christ? To run the race marked out for us? The prophet Micah wondered what a life pleasing to God looked like, what it could look like to walk in the course laid out for us. This is what he boiled it down to. Not burnt offerings, not 1,000 rams, or even one's firstborn. No, this is what the Lord desires, that we would act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. As you prepare to graduate today, fellow cardinals, you are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, navigation beacons in life. There are generations of men and women who have gone before you, who sat in these classrooms, who were challenged to think critically, who've gone out into the world to make a tangible and positive difference in people's lives. You have been surrounded by professors and mentors who have pushed you to ask critical questions, to look for solutions that serve to better people's lives and situations, to use your talents and gifts to transform the world into a better place. You have been surrounded by a community that has encouraged you to develop ethics and morals that lead you to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. Today, I challenge you to pursue the race that has been marked out for you. I encourage you to seek clouds of witnesses who will continue to challenge you, counsel you, grow you, support you, and push you to persevere in the journey that God has marked out for you. Surround yourself with mentors, voices, and resources that give you wisdom, speak truth in love, and challenge you to be better. Never be afraid to ask questions, to think critically, to seek out help and advice when the challenges are beyond your experience. When you feel lost, when the world does not offer easy answers, when the challenges of life leave you wondering if the effort is worth it, I implore you, fix your eyes on God. Fix your eyes on the witness of those who have gone before you. Each of our journeys will take us in different directions. Our paths may not cross often, but the race marked out is the same. Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with God. Blessings to you, my fellow cardinals, and peace.